2 inches. That's all that separated life from death. The bandit pressed his gun against the girl's temple. Wind gusting, sun blinding. And Kate Brennan, a 22-year-old female tracker, had only one shot. Miss and the girl dies. Hit and she becomes a legend. But this isn't just a story about one impossible shot. This is a story about a love that changed the Wild West forever. If you enjoy stories like this, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now let's go back to Texas 1878. The canyon echoed with gunfire. Catherine Brennan pressed herself flat against the boulder, Winchester rifle hot in her hands. The metal scorched her palms, but she held steady. 30 yards below, the bandit leader had his pistol jammed against Claire Sterling's temple. Blood trickled from the girl's split lip, carving a crimson path down her jaw. But her eyes burned with defiance, even now, even with death pressed against her skull. "I know you're up there, tracker." Emmett Cross's voice rasped like broken glass dragged across stone. "Show yourself or I paint these rocks with her brains." Kate's finger hovered over the trigger. 2 inches. That's all the margin she had between the girl's life and her death. Wind gusted from the west, carrying the scent of sage and blood. The morning sun sat directly in Kate's eyes, creating a glare on her scope that made the shot nearly impossible. Nearly. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged animal desperate for freedom. This was the shot that would define everything. Or end it. 24 hours ago, she'd been alone in her cabin on the edge of Amarillo, swearing she'd never let another man into her life. The walls she'd built were thick, reinforced by betrayal and loss. But then a desperate cowboy had ridden up with pleading eyes and a story about kidnapping and death. Now a girl's life hung by a thread thinner than spider silk. And somewhere in the chaos of the last day, Kate had started to feel something she'd buried 3 years ago, something she'd thought dead and gone forever. Hope. But first you need to understand how we got here. The stagecoach wreckage sat like a broken toy in the Texas dirt. Kate had arrived at the scene just as the afternoon sun began its long descent toward the horizon. The driver lay motionless near the overturned coach, his neck bent at an angle that told the story without words. 2 sets of drag marks led away from the wreckage, deep gouges in the earth where boots had scraped and struggled. But one set of tracks told a different story entirely. Someone had escaped. Kate knelt beside the boot prints, her weathered leather gloves brushing against the dusty soil. Late spring in 1878, and the Texas prairie stretched in every direction like a golden ocean. The heat pressed down on everything, making the air shimmer and dance. She'd been tracking animals since she was 7 years old, learning from her father who'd been a scout for the Army before settling down to raise cattle, and a daughter who refused to be anything but herself. The tracks were fresh, maybe 2 hours old, 3 horses all carrying double weight. She could tell from the depth of the hoof prints the way the earth compressed under the burden. One horse favored its left foreleg, the print slightly shallower on that side. An injury, or maybe just a thrown shoe. Either way, it would slow them down. Kate stood shielding her eyes against the glare, studying the trail that led northeast toward the broken country of ravines and canyons. Most people would see nothing but disturbed dirt and scattered rocks. To Kate, it was a story written as clearly as words on a page. The language of the land spoke to her in whispers and shouts, in bent grass and displaced pebbles, in the subtle shifts that marked where life had passed through. But something felt wrong. The trail was too obvious, too clear. A tracker of Emmett Cross's reputation, and she knew it was Cross from the boot print beside the dead driver. That distinctive worn heel didn't leave a trail this easy to follow unless he wanted to be followed. This wasn't a robbery that had gone wrong. This was bait, and she was the fish he wanted to catch. The question was why. She didn't have to wait long for an answer. She heard the horse before she saw it, hoofbeats pounding hard across the prairie. The rider came fast, a black stallion, kicking up dust devils in his wake. Kate's hand moved instinctively toward her rifle, then relaxed slightly as she recognized desperation in the way he rode. Too hard, too reckless. This man was running from ghosts, not towards something. He dismounted before the horse fully stopped, nearly stumbling in his haste. Kate took in his features with a tracker's eye for detail. Maybe 26 years old, dark hair that needed cutting jaw, covered in several days' worth of stubble. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, not some fancy rancher's son. There was something in his eyes that spoke of hard experience and harder choices. You, Catherine Brennan." His voice was rough, urgent. There was genuine desperation in it that made Kate look at him more carefully. She'd heard every kind of lie and manipulation in her 22 years, and this didn't sound like either. Depends who's asking. Kate didn't move from where she stood, keeping her body language neutral, unthreatening, but ready. Wyatt Dalton, Double M Ranch about 15 miles north of here. He yanked off his hat, ran a hand through sweat-soaked hair. The gesture seemed more about gathering his thoughts than politeness. My boss was on that stagecoach. So was his daughter. 3 men took them both, and I need someone who can track them before they get too far ahead. Sheriff said you were the best. Said you could track anything through any terrain. Kate looked back at the tracks, then at Wyatt Dalton. There was something in his face that went beyond professional concern for his employer. His hands were shaking slightly. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. "The daughter," she said slowly, watching his reaction. "You know her. Claire." Her name came out like a prayer or a curse, Kate couldn't tell which. "Her name is Claire, and she's 20 years old, and those men have her." He took a step closer, and Kate could see the raw fear and determination in his eyes. Something else, too. Something that looked like guilt. "I need you, Miss Brennan. I need you to help me find them before something terrible happens. Name what you want. I'll pay anything, do anything. Just please help me bring her home." There it was, the desperation of a man who cared deeply about someone in danger. Kate had turned down plenty of tracking jobs over the years, mostly from men who wanted her to find things that were better left lost. But this was different. This was about saving lives. Still, she hesitated. Something about the way he'd said Claire's name, the weight of it made Kate's walls go up. She'd sworn off getting involved with men and their complications. The last time she'd let someone in, he'd betrayed her for a banker's daughter with proper manners and a properly boring life. "I don't work for lovesick cowboys," Kate said, turning towards Storm, her gray mare who grazed nearby. "This isn't about love." Wyatt's voice cracked. It's always about love with men like you." Kate began walking away, her boots crunching in the dry grass. "Claire is the only family I've got." The raw anguish in his voice stopped Kate in her tracks. She turned slowly. Wyatt's composure shattered like glass. "I was 16, orphaned, stealing bread to survive. Edward Sterling caught me trying to take food from his ranch cookhouse. I expected a beating, maybe jail. Instead, he asked if I knew horses. I lied and said yes. He gave me a job, a home. Claire was 10 years old, used to follow me around asking a million questions about everything. She's my sister, Miss Brennan. Not by blood, but by everything that matters. And if those men kill her, I might as well be dead too." Kate studied his face. She'd seen plenty of liars in her time. This wasn't one. The pain in his eyes was real. The fear was real. And despite every instinct telling her to walk away, despite every wall she'd built to protect herself, she found herself saying, $50 a day plus expenses. We leave now, and you follow my lead, not the other way around." The relief that flooded Wyatt's face was so complete that he looked like a different man for a moment. "Thank you, God, thank you. I have supplies on my horse. I can get more from town if we need them." "We don't have time for that." Kate whistled sharply, and Storm trotted over. "We'll make do with what we have. The tracks head northeast toward the rough country. If they're smart, they'll try to lose us in the breaks and canyons. If they're not smart, we'll catch them before nightfall." They mounted up and rode out immediately, following the trail that only Kate could fully see. To Wyatt, the ground probably looked like nothing more than disturbed dirt and scattered rocks. To Kate, it was a story written in earth and stone in the language her father had taught her before his heart gave out 3 years ago. While Kate and Wyatt began their pursuit 30 miles ahead in a natural clearing surrounded by canyon walls, Emmett Cross stared at the bruised girl tied to the cottonwood tree. She reminded him of someone. His sister, maybe, before the war took everything. Before Captain James Brennan destroyed his life for one moment of weakness. He shook off the thought. Sentiment was a luxury dead men couldn't afford. "Boss, why are we waiting?" Jake Mullins scratched his stubbled chin, his trigger finger never far from his gun. "We could be across the Mexican border by now, with the ransom money." "Because she's coming." Cross touched the scar that split his face from temple to jaw, a gift from Shiloh in 1862. The wound had festered for weeks in that Union prison, and he'd welcomed the pain. It reminded him to hate. Catherine Brennan, best tracker in Texas. Jake laughed, a sound like gravel in a tin can. A woman? You're scared of a woman. Cross's hand was around Jake's throat before the insult finished forming. He squeezed just hard enough to make his point, watching Jake's eyes bulge and his face turn red. That woman hunted down the Yates brothers when every lawman in 3 territories couldn't find them. She tracked the McAllister gang through a dust storm and brought them in alive. She found Black Tom Grady after he'd been hiding in the Llano Estacado for 2 years. And 16 years ago, her daddy put this scar on my face when I tried to desert. He released Jake, who stumbled backward, gasping. Her daddy took something from me at Shiloh. Cross continued, his voice cold and flat. Time to collect what I'm owed. Tom Reeves, the 3rd member of their group, shifted nervously. He'd been having doubts since they took the Sterling girl. This was supposed to be a simple ransom job. Now it was starting to feel like something darker. What exactly are you planning, Emmett? Tom asked. Cross smiled, and it was not a pleasant thing to see. Revenge is a dish best served with witnesses, Tom. I want Catherine Brennan to fail, to watch someone die because she wasn't good enough, to live with that weight the way I've lived with mine. Then maybe I'll kill her after she's broken. The memory came to Kate unbidden as she rode, triggered by the endless Texas prairie that looked so much like it had when she was 7 years old. Her father knelt beside the creek, pointing at disturbed mud with a weathered finger. The morning sun caught the gray in his hair, making it shine like silver threads. Catherine, look here. His voice was patient, the way it always was when he taught her. What do you see? 7-year-old Kate squinted at the mud. To her young eyes, it looked like nothing more than wet dirt. Nothing, Papa. Everything in nature has a pattern, darling. When something disturbs that pattern, it tells a story. He traced the mud, gently, careful not to add his own marks. See how these pebbles are turned? A deer came through here. See the depth of the prints. She was carrying a fawn. Kate's eyes widened with wonder. How do you know it's a she? How do you know about the baby? Captain James Brennan smiled, and it was a smile full of love and patience. The land speaks, darling. You just have to learn its language. The depth tells me about weight. The gate tells me about purpose. A buck would move differently. A doe protecting a fawn moves with care, placing each step deliberately. He stood, taking her small hand in his large, calloused one. This gift I'm teaching you, Kate, it's not just about finding animals or tracking criminals. It's about paying attention, about seeing what others miss, about understanding that everything leaves a mark, everything tells a story. You remember that. Kate had remembered. She'd spent the next 15 years learning to read those stories, becoming better than even her father had been. And now, riding across the same kind of prairie where he'd taught her, she used those skills to follow 3 horses carrying captives toward an uncertain fate. They rode in silence for a while, Kate's eyes constantly scanning the ground, reading the story the tracks told. To her surprise, Wyatt didn't pepper her with questions or doubt her methods. He simply watched, genuinely curious about how she did what she did. How do you do that? He finally asked after she found the trail for the 4th time after it had seemingly disappeared over a stretch of bare rock. How do you see what nobody else can see? Kate glanced at him, surprised by the genuine curiosity in his voice. Most men she worked with either dismissed her skills as some kind of female intuition, which made her want to punch them, or treated her like a useful tool and nothing more. Wyatt sounded like he actually wanted to understand. My father taught me to look at the whole picture, not just the obvious signs, she said, reining storm to a halt beside a cluster of stones. Everything in nature has a pattern. When something or someone disturbs that pattern, it leaves traces. You just have to know what you're looking for. She pointed to the rocks. See how those stones are arranged. They look random, but there's a gap there that's slightly wider than it should be. A horse stepped between them not more than an hour ago, spreading them apart. And see that bush? The leaves on one side are turned the wrong way. Something brushed past them, and they haven't had time to turn back toward the sun yet. That's incredible, Wyatt said, and there was such honest admiration in his voice that Kate felt her cheeks warm slightly. She wasn't used to praise, at least not the kind that felt genuine rather than grudging. It's just paying attention, she said, but she couldn't quite keep the small smile off her face. As the afternoon wore on and the terrain grew rougher, they left the open prairie behind and entered the broken country of ravines and mesas. The tracks were still clear to Kate, though the bandits had tried several times to cover their trail by riding through streams or over stretches of bare rock. Each time she found where they'd come out again, reading the signs that most people would miss entirely. A scraped boulder here, a broken branch there. The way the water in a stream was still slightly cloudy from recent passage. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Kate held up her hand suddenly. Wyatt pulled his horse to an immediate stop, his hand dropping instinctively to the rifle on his saddle. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Kate dismounted and walked forward slowly, her eyes scanning the ground with intense focus. "They stopped here recently. See the droppings from the horses, still fresh, maybe an hour old. And here someone walked around." She knelt beside a set of small boot prints. Her jaw tightened. That would be Claire. She got down from the horse, walked over to those rocks. Kate followed the tracks to a cluster of boulders and knelt down. When she stood up, her expression was grim. There was a struggle. She tried to run, but they caught her, dragged her back to the horses. Wyatt's jaw tightened, and for a moment Kate saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. Something that spoke of violence and vengeance. "Is she hurt?" "I can't tell from the tracks alone," Kate said honestly, "but she's fighting them, which means she's strong and alert. That's good." She looked up at the darkening sky. The sun balanced on the western horizon like a copper coin, and shadows were already pooling in the canyons. "We're going to lose the light soon. We have two choices. We can make camp here and pick up the trail at first light, or we can keep going and risk losing them in the dark." "How far ahead are they?" Wyatt's voice was tight, controlled, but Kate could hear the desperation underneath. "An hour, maybe less. Their horses are tired. If we push hard, we might catch up to them tonight." She paused, meeting his eyes. "But we'd be riding blind in rough country. I can track in the dark if there's moonlight, but not here. Not in these canyons where one wrong step could send a horse over a cliff." Wyatt looked torn, his hands gripping his reins so tight his knuckles had gone white. "I can't stand the thought of her spending another night with those animals. And I can't find her if my horse breaks a leg in a prairie dog hole in the dark," Kate said gently but firmly. "We'll do her more good by being smart about this. We make camp rest for a few hours and leave before dawn. Their horses need rest as much as ours do. They'll have to stop too." Wyatt nodded reluctantly, and they found a sheltered spot in a small canyon where they could build a fire without it being seen from a distance. Kate gathered wood while Wyatt unsaddled the horses and set up a simple camp. It was a familiar routine, the kind of thing both of them had done hundreds of times before, and they worked together with an easy efficiency that surprised them both. When the fire was burning and coffee was heating in a battered pot, Wyatt sat down on a rock across from Kate and finally let some of the tension drain from his shoulders. "I want to apologize," he said suddenly, "for how I came at you back there all desperate and demanding. That wasn't fair to you." Kate looked up from checking her rifle, making sure it was ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. "You're worried about someone you care about. No apology needed. It's more than that." Wyatt stared into the fire, his expression distant, lost in memory. "Claire and I grew up together. Her father took me on as a hand when I was 16 and had nowhere else to go. I was just some kid who knew horses, or at least I pretended to, and not much else. Mister Sterling treated me fair, paid me decent, taught me the ranching business. And Claire, she was this wild, happy girl who used to follow me around the ranch, asking a million questions about everything." He smiled slightly at the memory, and Kate saw genuine affection there. Not the desperate, possessive kind of love she'd seen in other men, but something gentler. Something that looked like family. "When she left for that finishing school in Fort Worth," Wyatt continued, "I told myself it was good, that she deserved to become a proper lady and have opportunities beyond ranch life. But the truth is, I've thought about her every day she's been gone." There was something in his voice that made Kate understand. She'd heard this kind of longing before, usually from men talking about women they loved. But there was something else there too, something Wyatt himself might not have recognized yet. "You love her," Kate said simply, stating what seemed obvious. Wyatt looked up, meeting her eyes. The firelight played across his face, creating shadows that made him look older, wearier. "I do, not that it matters much. She's the boss's daughter, and I'm just a cowboy who works for her father. When she comes back, if we get her back, she'll probably marry some wealthy rancher's son and live the kind of life she deserves. But I still have to get her back safe. I have to know she's all right. Kate poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to Wyatt. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and she felt a small jolt of something she didn't want to name. Love doesn't care much about what's proper or what makes sense, she said. It just is. And from what you've told me about her, she sounds like someone who makes her own choices. Maybe. Wyatt took a sip of the bitter coffee, grimacing slightly. What about you? You ever been in love? The question surprised Kate, but there was nothing inappropriate about the way Wyatt asked it. It was just two people talking honestly while they waited for dawn, sharing the kind of truths that only come out in firelight and darkness. Once, Kate admitted, when I was 18, a soldier at Fort Richardson, Lieutenant Marcus Webb. He said all the right things, made all the right promises. Then he got transferred east and decided that a woman who could track and shoot wasn't proper wife material. He married a banker's daughter in St. Louis instead. She shrugged, trying to make it sound like it didn't matter, like it didn't still sting sometimes when she thought about it. After that, I decided I'd rather be alone than pretend to be something I'm not. His loss, Wyatt said, and the simplicity of the statement somehow meant more than any elaborate compliment could have. He said it like it was a fact, not an opinion. Like any man who couldn't see Kate's worth was obviously a fool. They talked more as the night deepened, sharing stories about their lives, their families, their dreams. Kate learned that Wyatt had been born in Arkansas and came to Texas after his parents died of yellow fever when he was 15. He'd worked his way across the state, learning the cattle business from the ground up until Edward Sterling had given him a permanent position at the Double M. He was good with horses, better than anyone else on the ranch, and he'd been saving his wages with some vague idea of starting his own place someday. Wyatt learned that Kate's mother had died when she was young, childbirth complications that took both mother and baby, and her father had raised her alone on their small ranch. Captain Brennan had never treated her like she was limited because she was a girl. Instead, he'd taught her everything he knew about reading the land and surviving in wild country. When he died 3 years ago, his heart simply giving out one afternoon in the barn, she'd sold the ranch and started tracking for hire, building a reputation that had spread across the territory. You ever get lonely? Wyatt asked as the fire burned down to embers. Kate considered the question. The honest answer was yes. Sometimes she got desperately lonely, but admitting that felt like weakness, and Kate had spent her whole life being strong. Sometimes, she finally said, but I'd rather be lonely than trapped in a life that doesn't fit me. Most men I've met want a woman who will keep house and have babies and not have opinions about anything important. That's not me, and I won't pretend it is. Some men are fools, Wyatt said quietly. A woman who can do what you do, who has the skills and the courage to live on her own terms, that's worth more than all the proper ladies in Texas. Kate felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the wall she'd built around herself. She looked at Wyatt across the dying fire and saw a man who spoke from genuine conviction, not from some desire to flatter or manipulate. He meant what he said, and that made all the difference. They took turns keeping watch through the night, catching a few hours of sleep each. When the stars were still bright overhead, but the eastern horizon was just beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn, Kate woke Wyatt with a gentle shake of his shoulder. Time to move, she said quietly. They saddled up quickly and set out, following the trail by the faint light of approaching dawn. The tracks were still clear, leading deeper into the canyon country, where the landscape became a maze of twisting passages and dead ends. Kate moved more slowly now, aware that they might be getting close and not wanting to stumble into the bandits' camp unprepared. The sun was just breaking over the horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and amber when she spotted the smoke. A thin tendril rising from behind a rock formation about half a mile ahead. She motioned Wyatt to stop and dismounted, pulling her rifle from its scabbard. Wyatt did the same, and they led their horses quietly into a sheltered draw where they couldn't be seen. The horses were tired, their breath coming in soft snorts, but they stood quietly, well-trained and patient. That will be them, Kate whispered, her lips barely moving. We need to get close enough to see what we're dealing with before we make any moves. They moved forward on foot, using the rocks and scrubby vegetation for cover. Kate led the way, her eyes constantly scanning for any sign of sentries or guards. Cross was too smart to leave his camp unprotected, but so far, she saw nothing. Maybe he was that confident. Maybe he wanted them to find him. As they got closer, they could hear voices, rough laughter, the sound of horses moving around. Kate found a position behind a large boulder that gave them a view down into a small natural clearing. Her breath caught in her road. There were three men just as the tracks had indicated. Two of them looked like typical outlaws, rough and dirty with gun belts slung low on their hips. But the third man, the leader, he was different. Older, maybe late 30s, with a scar running down the left side of his face like a jagged lightning bolt. His eyes were cold and calculating, and even from this distance, Kate could see the intelligence in them. This was not some common criminal. This was someone who planned, who thought ahead, who was dangerous in ways that went beyond simple violence. Claire Sterling sat on the ground near the fire, her hands tied in front of her. Her dress was torn and dirty, stained with dust and what looked like blood, though Kate couldn't tell if it was hers. There was a bruise on her cheek, dark and ugly, but she held herself with a dignity that spoke of inner strength. Her father lay nearby, also bound, and he looked to be in worse shape. His head was bandaged, and he wasn't moving much. Possibly injured during the initial attack, possibly concussed. Wyatt made a small sound in his throat when he saw Claire, a noise of anguish and rage mixed together. Kate put a restraining hand on his arm, feeling the tension vibrating through him like a plucked wire. "Easy," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "We need a plan." "The plan is I shoot them and get her out of there," Wyatt said, his voice barely controlled, each word clipped and hard. "And if you miss, if they use her as a shield, if you hit her by accident—" Kate kept her grip on his arm, feeling the muscles coiled tight beneath his sleeve. "We need to be smart about this." Wyatt took a deep breath, clearly fighting every instinct that screamed at him to charge down there. After a long moment, he nodded. "All right, what do you suggest?" Kate studied the camp carefully, her tracker's eye taking in every detail. The two younger ones are getting ready to ride out. See them saddling their horses. Probably to scout ahead or find water. The leader is staying with the prisoners. Once the other two are gone, it will be easier to handle one man. They waited crouched behind the rocks as the sun climbed higher and the heat began to build. Kate's knees ached from holding the position, but she didn't move. Patience was part of tracking, part of hunting. You waited for the right moment, and you didn't let discomfort make you careless. Finally, the two bandits mounted up and rode off, heading roughly north. Kate watched them disappear around a bend in the canyon, then waited another 10 minutes to make sure they were really gone and not circling back. The leader walked over to Claire and said something Kate couldn't hear. Claire's response was to turn her face away, refusing to look at him. Even bound and bruised, she had spirit. The man laughed, a sound that didn't carry warmth, and walked back to the fire. "Now," Kate whispered, "we circle around. I'll come in from the north side, you from the south. We get as close as we can, and then we take him together. You understand? Together, not you charging in like some hero in a dime novel." Wyatt nodded, and Kate saw that he'd gotten himself under control. Good. They needed clear heads for this. They split up, moving carefully through the rocks. Kate kept her rifle ready, her finger near the trigger, but not on it. She'd learned long ago that accidents happened when people were too eager to shoot. Better to be a half-second slow than to shoot the wrong person. She was about 30 yards from the camp when everything went wrong. A loose rock shifted under her boot. It was a small sound, just a faint scrape of stone against stone. But in the stillness of the morning, it might as well have been a gunshot. The bandit leader's head snapped up. His hand went to his gun with the speed of long practice. "Company!" he shouted, even though his companions were long gone. He moved with terrifying speed, diving toward Claire and hauling her up by the arm. She cried out in pain, and then he had her in front of him like a shield, his gun pressed to her temple. "I know you're out there, Brennan," he shouted. "Show yourself, or the girl dies." Kate's heart stopped. How did he know her name? How did he know she was here? Wyatt stepped out from his position, rifle aimed at the bandit. His voice was steady, controlled, but Kate could hear the fear underneath. "Let her go. This doesn't have to end with anyone else getting hurt." The bandit laughed, and it was a terrible sound, empty and cold. "You think I'm stupid, Cowboy. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Drop your weapon and step into the clearing, or I put a bullet in this pretty girl's head. Your choice. You got 5 seconds. Kate moved silently, using the bandit's focus on Wyatt to get into position. She could see the fear in Claire's eyes, but also a fierce determination. The girl was watching, waiting for an opportunity. Smart. 5, the bandit counted. Right, Wyatt said, lowering his rifle slowly. Just don't hurt her, I'm coming in. 4. As Wyatt stepped forward, his hands raised, Kate saw her chance. The bandit's attention was completely on Wyatt, his gun still pressed to Claire's temple, but his body was slightly angled away from where Kate was hidden. It was a difficult shot, maybe impossible. 30 yards with a cross breeze, sun creating glare, target moving slightly, margin of error measured in inches. If she missed by even a fraction, if the bullet went wide or low or high, Claire Sterling would die. 3. Kate raised her rifle. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, clear as if he were standing beside her. The land speaks, darling. You just have to listen. And right now, in this moment, everything was speaking to her. The wind telling her about drift, the light telling her about angles, the rhythm of the bandit's breathing, the slight sway of his body, all of it combining into a perfect moment of clarity. She took a breath, let half of it out. The world narrowed to the sight picture. The bandit's scarred face, Claire's terrified eyes, Wyatt standing exposed, trusting Kate to save them all. 2. The rifle was warm in her hands, familiar, like coming home. She felt the trigger give beneath her finger. Not a pull, but a squeeze, gentle and inevitable as sunrise. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The shot cracked through the canyon, echoing off the walls like thunder. Emmett Cross's head snapped back. The scar that had defined him for 16 years split open in a spray of red. His gun discharged harmlessly into the air as he felt his body crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. Perfect headshot, 2 inches from Claire's temple. Silence crashed over the canyon like a physical thing. Then Claire stumbled forward, and Wyatt was there instantly, catching her as her legs gave out. She collapsed against him, sobbing with relief and terror in the aftermath of coming so close to death. Kate emerged from her hiding spot, rifle still ready. She approached Cross's body, carefully keeping her weapon trained on him, but he was definitely dead. The shot had been perfect, just like her father had taught her. Clean, quick, merciful in its own way. She lowered her weapon and went to check on Edward Sterling while Wyatt untied Claire's hands. The older man was in rough shape. He'd been pistol whipped during the attack and his head wound needed attention, but his breathing was steady and his pulse was strong. He needs a doctor, Kate told Wyatt, tearing strips from her spare shirt to bandage the wound more securely. But I think he'll be all right if we get him back to town soon. Claire pulled back from Wyatt, though she kept one hand firmly wrapped around his arm, like she needed the anchor. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was steel underneath the tears. Who are you? She asked Kate. Catherine Brennan. Tracker. He hired me to find you. Claire looked between Kate and Wyatt, and something like understanding crossed her face. She was young, but she wasn't stupid. She'd seen how Wyatt had looked at Kate when she emerged from cover. She'd heard the way he said Kate's name. You saved my life, Claire said, her voice still shaky but growing stronger. Both of you, I don't know how to thank you. Getting you and your father home safe is thanks enough, Kate said. She went to retrieve their horses, while Wyatt helped Claire get her father up and ready to travel. By the time Kate returned, the 2 bandit horses had wandered into the clearing, drawn by the presence of other animals and the scent of water. They got Edward Sterling onto one of them, securing him carefully so he wouldn't fall. Claire rode double with Wyatt on his black stallion, Thunder her arms wrapped around his waist. The ride back to Amarillo took most of the day. They had to go slowly because of Edward Sterling's injuries, and they kept a careful watch in case the other 2 bandits decided to come back. But the countryside remained quiet except for the wind and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. By late afternoon, they could see the buildings of Amarillo rising from the prairie ahead, a small cluster of civilization in the vast expanse of Texas. The town looked the same as always, but Kate felt different. Something had shifted in the last 24 hours. Something she couldn't quite name, but could feel settling into her bones like the ache after a hard ride. The town doctor took charge of Edward Sterling as soon as they arrived, assuring them that while he had a concussion and would need rest, he would make a full recovery. The sheriff wanted statements from everyone, and it was well after dark by the time all the formalities were dealt with. The dead bandit had turned out to be Emmett Cross, a known outlaw, with a $500 price on his head. The reward money would be considerable, and the sheriff made it clear that Kate and Wyatt would split it evenly. Kate was standing outside the sheriff's office, feeling the exhaustion of the past 2 days settling into her bones like lead when Wyatt came out to join her. The street was quiet, most of Amarillo already settling in for the night. "Claire's at the hotel with her father," Wyatt said. "She wanted me to thank you again. She says she'll never forget what you did." "I was just doing my job," Kate said, but she was glad Claire was safe. Glad they'd gotten there in time. It was more than that. Wyatt looked at her in the light spilling from the office window, his expression serious. "That shot. The sheriff said it was one of the best pieces of shooting he's ever seen, and he's seen plenty." Kate shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise, even though part of her warmed to it. "I've been shooting since I was old enough to hold a rifle. It was just practice." "No." Wyatt stepped closer, and Kate's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. It was skill and courage and a steady hand when everyone else would have panicked. "Miss Brennan, Kate, I know we just met, but I feel like I've known you much longer. The way we worked together out there, it was like we could read each other's thoughts." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "And the things we talked about last night by the fire. I've never talked to anyone like that before. Never felt that kind of connection." Kate's heart was beating faster, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to run away or step closer. "What are you saying, Wyatt?" "I'm saying that I think I might have been wrong about Claire. I thought what I felt for her was love, but being around you has shown me the difference between caring about someone and actually connecting with them. Claire is wonderful, and I want her to be happy. She's family, and I'll always care about her. But she's not the person I want to spend my life with." He reached out and took Kate's hand, his grip warm and solid and sure. "You are the person I can't stop thinking about. You're the person I want to keep talking to until the sun comes up. You're the person who makes me feel like maybe I could be more than just a cowboy drifting from job to job." Kate's breath caught in her throat. She'd built walls around her heart for so long, telling herself that she didn't need anyone, that she was better off alone. But standing there with Wyatt looking at her like she was the most important person in the world, she felt those walls beginning to crumble. "Wyatt, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me see you again." His voice was soft but urgent. "Say you'll give me a chance to show you that not all men are like that soldier who broke your heart. Say you'll let me prove that I see you for who you really are, and that's exactly who I want." Kate looked up at him, seeing the honesty and hope in his eyes. She thought about the way they'd worked together, the easy conversations, the way he'd listened to her and respected her skills without feeling threatened by them. She thought about how he made her feel seen and valued in a way she hadn't felt in years. And she thought about the way her heart had skipped when he smiled at her across the campfire. Her father's words echoed in her memory. "The right person adds to your life, doesn't subtract from it." "All right," she said softly, and felt the last of her walls crack and fall. "All right, yes, I'll give this a chance. I'll give us a chance." Wyatt's face lit up with such genuine joy that Kate couldn't help but smile back. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that it made her chest ache. "You've made me very happy, Kate Brennan." "We'll see if you still feel that way when you get to know me better," she said, but she was teasing, and he knew it. "I can't wait to find out," he said. They stood there in the quiet street, holding hands and looking at each other. And Kate felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, something she'd thought dead and buried with her father and her broken heart and all the years of being alone. She felt hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who could accept all of her. The tracker and the fighter and the woman who was terrified of being weak. Someone who saw her completely and wanted her anyway. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. The Texas night was alive with the sounds of the world, and Kate Brennan stood in the middle of Amarillo, holding the hand of a cowboy who'd asked her to name what she wanted. What she wanted, she was beginning to realize, was standing right in front of her. The morning after Kate agreed to give Wyatt a chance, she woke in her small cabin on the edge of Amarillo, with sunlight streaming through the window and the memory of his kiss still warm on her knuckles. For a moment, lying there in the familiar comfort of her own bed, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Opening yourself to someone meant giving them the power to hurt you, and Kate had sworn she'd never give anyone that power again. Then she remembered the way Wyatt had looked at her in the firelight, the way he'd listened when she talked about tracking genuinely interested, never once suggesting she was less capable because she was a woman, the way his hand had felt in hers, warm and solid and real. Maybe this time would be different. She was making coffee when she heard the knock at her door. Opening it, she found Claire Sterling standing on her small porch looking nervous but determined. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight to a deep purple, but her eyes were clear and steady. "Miss Brennan," Claire said, "may I come in? I need to speak with you." Kate stepped aside, gesturing her in. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was clean and comfortable. Her father's rifle hung over the fireplace, and his old tracking maps were tacked to the wall. Claire's eyes took it all in with undisguised curiosity. "Coffee?" Kate offered, pouring herself a cup. "Please." Claire sat at the small table, her hands folded in front of her. She looked like she was gathering her courage for something difficult. Kate set a cup in front of her and sat down across the table waiting. She'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to get information was simply to be quiet and let the other person fill the silence. "I need to tell you something," Claire finally said. "About Wyatt." Kate's chest tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. Here it comes, she thought, the claim, the "he's mine" that she'd been half expecting since yesterday. "I've known him 10 years. Claire continued, wrapping her hands around the cup like she needed the warmth. "Since I was a child. He's been like an older brother to me. My protector, my friend. When I was little, I used to think that maybe someday when I grew up, we'd get married. That seemed like how these stories were supposed to go." She took a sip of coffee, grimacing slightly at the bitterness. Kate made her coffee strong the way her father had taught her, meant to wake you up and keep you alert on long tracking jobs. "But then I grew up," Claire said. "I went to finishing school in Fort Worth, met other people, learned what the world was like beyond the Double M Ranch. And I realized that what I felt for Wyatt was gratitude and affection and love. Yes, but not the kind of love you build a life on. Not the kind of love that makes your heart race when someone walks into a room." Kate felt something unclench in her chest. "I don't understand. Why are you telling me this?" Claire smiled, and it transformed her face despite the bruise. "Because I'm engaged, Miss Brennan, to Robert Morgan, a lawyer from Fort Worth. We're getting married in the fall. My father likes him. I love him. And when Robert walks into a room, my heart does things that it's never done for Wyatt." She leaned forward, her eyes serious. "I saw how Wyatt looked at you yesterday when you made that impossible shot. I saw how he looked at you when he thought no one was watching. I've known him for 10 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone like that. Not even me." "Claire," Kate started, but the younger woman held up her hand. "Let me finish. You saved my life. You saved my father's life. You rode into danger for people you didn't even know because Wyatt asked you to. And I could see, even in the middle of all that fear and chaos, I could see something happening between you two. Something real." She reached across the table and took Kate's hand. "Wyatt needs someone who can match his depth, someone who challenges him, someone who's strong enough to stand beside him, not behind him. And honestly, Miss Brennan, I think you might need him too. You saved us, but watching you work, watching how you are, I think maybe you've been alone for too long." Kate felt tears prick her eyes, which was ridiculous. She never cried. But there was something about this young woman's kindness, her generosity, that touched something deep inside Kate's carefully guarded heart. "I'd like for us to be friends," Claire continued. "If you'll have me. I know we're different, but I think we could be good friends. And selfishly, I'd like to know the woman who's going to make Wyatt happy. Because he deserves to be happy, and I think you might be the only person who can do that." "I don't know if I can," Kate admitted, her voice rough. "I don't know if I'm good at this, at letting people in." "Then learn," Claire squeezed her hand. "We're all learning all the time. That's what life is. And I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for. Anyone who can make that shot under that kind of pressure, anyone who can live the life you've lived, that person is brave enough to take a chance on love." After Claire left, Kate sat alone in her cabin for a long time, staring at her father's rifle over the fireplace. She remembered him teaching her to shoot when she was 8 years old. her small hands barely able to hold the weapon steady. "Fear is natural, Katie girl," he'd said. "Any fool can be fearless, that's just ignorance. But courage, real courage, that's being afraid and doing it anyway." She'd been afraid yesterday when she took that shot, terrified that she'd miss, that she'd hit Claire instead of Cross, that she'd fail when it mattered most. But she'd done it anyway. Maybe being with Wyatt was the same thing. Maybe love required the same kind of courage as pulling that trigger. You had to trust yourself, trust your aim, trust that you were good enough and strong enough to hit your mark. The wildflowers started appearing the next morning. Kate found them on her doorstep when she went out to feed Storm, prairie clover and bluebonnets tied together with a piece of rough twine. No note, but she knew who they were from. The second morning there were more. Indian paintbrush this time, the red flowers bright against the weathered wood of her porch. By the seventh day, Kate was getting up early just to catch him in the act. She opened her door while Wyatt was still kneeling on her porch, placing a bouquet of wild roses, the kind that grew in the rough country where nothing else would survive. They stared at each other. "Caught," Wyatt said, looking sheepish but not embarrassed. Kate tried to look stern. She really did. But she couldn't quite manage it. "You know I can track anything, right? Did you think I wouldn't figure out it was you?" "I was hoping you'd appreciate the persistence," Wyatt said, standing up slowly, dusting off his knees. She picked up the roses, careful of the thorns. "I do." The smile that spread across his face was worth more than all the gold in California. That afternoon, Wyatt asked if she'd teach him to track. Kate agreed, expecting him to give up after an hour of kneeling in the dirt, examining horse droppings and broken twigs. Most people found tracking tedious, all the careful attention at tiny details that seemed meaningless until you understood the larger pattern. But Wyatt didn't give up. He listened to her explanations with the same intensity he'd shown during the rescue. He asked intelligent questions. He practiced until his knees hurt from kneeling, studying prints in disturbed earth, trying to read the stories written there. "Why do you want to learn this?" Kate asked after he'd correctly identified which direction a coyote had been traveling based on the depth of its paw prints. "You're a horseman, not a tracker." Wyatt looked up at her, squinting against the afternoon sun. "Because it's your world. I want to understand it. I want to understand you." That night, alone in her cabin, Kate pressed one of his wildflowers into a book. A book of poems her mother had left behind, one of the few things Kate had of her. She placed the flower between the pages, marking a poem about love and courage, and felt something warm unfold in her chest. The third week, Wyatt took her to dinner at Amarillo's small restaurant. It wasn't fancy, just a few tables and a menu that changed based on what the cook felt like making that day. But it was the best Amarillo had to offer, and Wyatt had clearly gone to some effort. He'd shaved, put on his Sunday shirt, combed his hair back. They both ordered steak. Kate caught Wyatt's amused look and felt defensive. "What? Nothing. I like that you know what you want, and you're not afraid to ask for it. As opposed to what ordering a salad because that's what ladies are supposed to eat. As opposed to pretending to be someone you're not to impress someone." Wyatt leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "You don't play games, Kate. I like that about you." They talked for 3 hours, about horses and tracking, about dreams and disappointments. Wyatt told her more about his time drifting across Texas, the hard years between losing his parents and finding Edward Sterling. Kate told him about the first time she'd tracked a criminal, a horse thief, who'd stolen from a neighboring ranch. She'd been 19 and her father had just died, and she'd needed to prove to herself that she could do this thing he'd taught her. "I was terrified the whole time," she admitted, "not of the thief, but of failing, of dishonoring what my father had given me." "But you didn't fail." "No, I tracked him for 3 days through some of the roughest country in Texas. Found him trying to sell the horses in a town 50 miles away. The sheriff was so surprised when I showed up with proof that he actually apologized for doubting me." Wyatt reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was becoming familiar now, comfortable. "Your father would be proud of you, of who you've become." Kate felt her throat tighten. "I hope so." As they were leaving the restaurant, Wyatt asked if she'd like to go for a ride the next day. Not tracking, just riding, to watch the sunset over the plains. Kate said yes. The fourth week, Wyatt borrowed a buggy from the livery and drove her out to a spot he knew, a high point, where you could see the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions. They arrived just as the sun was beginning its descent, the sky turning shades of gold and amber and deep crimson. Kate had watched thousands of sunsets in her life. Growing up on the Texas prairie, they were as common as breathing. But she'd never really paid attention to them, never really stopped to appreciate the beauty. There was always something to do, some task that needed completing, some practical concern that demanded her focus. I used to think sunsets were boring, she said, watching the colors paint the sky. My father would make me stop tracking to watch them. I'd get impatient, wanting to get back to work. And now, Wyatt asked softly. Kate thought about it, about how the last month had changed her perspective on so many things. Now I understand. Some things you can't rush, some things you need to stop and appreciate, or you miss them entirely. Like what? She turned to look at him, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. He was looking at her the way she imagined men in romantic novels looked at the women they loved, like she was something precious and rare and worth protecting. Like this, she said quietly. Their first kiss had been brief, tentative, outside the sheriff's office on the night they'd agreed to give this a chance. This kiss was different. Wyatt cupped her face in his hands, gentle and careful, and kissed her like he had all the time in the world. Like nothing else mattered except this moment, this connection between them. Kate kissed him back and felt the last of her walls crumble to dust. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had set completely, and the first stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Wyatt rested his forehead against hers, and Kate could feel his smile even without seeing it. I'm falling in love with you, Kate Brennan, he said. Just so you know. Kate's heart stuttered in her chest. The old fear rose up, the instinct to pull away to protect herself before she could get hurt. But she pushed it down. Claire's words echoed in her mind. Anyone who can make that shot, anyone who can live the life you've lived, that person is brave enough to take a chance on love. Good, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, because I think I'm falling in love with you too. 3 months after they'd met on a warm evening in August, Wyatt took Kate out to a spot on the prairie where they could see for miles in every direction. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber, and the grass moved in waves under the evening breeze. Kate knew what was coming. She'd seen the nervous energy in Wyatt all day, the way he kept touching his pocket, checking to make sure something was still there. Part of her wanted to make a joke, to lighten the moment with humor, but she stayed quiet, letting him do this his way. I've been thinking, Wyatt said, his voice steady despite the nerves she could see in his eyes, about my future, about what I want from my life. And what do you want? Kate asked, even though she thought she knew the answer. I want a place of my own. Nothing big, just a few 100 acres where I can raise horses. I've been saving for years, and with the reward, money from catching cross, I have enough for a down payment on some land east of here. Good grazing, reliable water, room to grow. He turned to face her, fully taking both her hands in his. But I don't want to do it alone, Kate. I want a partner, someone who's strong enough to handle the hard times and wise enough to appreciate the good times. Someone who can track down a lost horse when it wanders off and shoot straight when the wolves come prowling. Someone who makes me want to be better than I am. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, a silver band with a small turquoise stone. The kind of thing that was both practical and beautiful, meant to last through hard work and harder weather. Catherine Brennan, love you. I love your strength and your independence and your stubborn heart. I love the way you see the world, and I love the way you've taught to see it too. Will you marry me? Will you be my partner in all things? Kate looked at the ring, at Wyatt, at the endless prairie that had been her freedom and her prison, her home and her wilderness. She thought about all the years she'd spent alone, telling herself it was better this way, safer this way. She thought about Marcus Webb and the way he'd made her feel like she needed to be smaller, quieter, less herself to be worthy of love. And then she thought about Wyatt, about the way he celebrated her skills instead of feeling threatened by them, about how he'd asked her to teach him tracking because he wanted to understand her world, about the wildflowers and the sunset and the way he looked at her like she was exactly right, just as she was. This wasn't about need. This wasn't about being incomplete without him. This was about want. She wanted to build something with Wyatt. She wanted to wake up next to him every morning and fall asleep beside him every night. She wanted to share the work, in the worry, in the joy of creating something together. Yes, she said, and tears stung her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. Yes, I'll marry you. Wyatt slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the whole world seemed to fade away until there was nothing but the two of them and the infinite possibility of the future stretching out ahead. They were married in September in a simple ceremony at the small church in Amarillo. Claire was there along with Edward Sterling, who'd recovered fully from his injuries. Robert Morgan stood beside Claire, and Kate could see what her friend had meant. The way Claire looked at Robert, the way he looked at her, that was the kind of love songs were written about. The church was full of people who'd known Kate over the years, ranchers she'd worked for, the sheriff, the town doctor. Several of the women who ran businesses in Amarillo, seamstresses and boarding house owners who'd always treated Kate with respect even when others looked down on her unconventional life. Kate wore a dress she'd bought special for the occasion, a deep blue that matched her eyes. Not traditional white, but she'd never been traditional, and she wasn't about to start now. Wyatt wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable, like a horse in unfamiliar tack. When they exchanged their vows, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives, Kate's voice was strong and clear. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was choosing this. Choosing him. Choosing the risk and the vulnerability and the terrifying, wonderful possibility of sharing her life with someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway. The kiss that sealed their vows was met with applause and cheers from the packed church. And when they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Kate felt something she'd never felt before. She felt like she'd come home. The celebration afterward was at the saloon where the owner had cleared out one of the back rooms for the occasion. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Kate found herself being spun around the floor by Wyatt laughing as he stepped on her feet for the third time. "I can't dance worth a damn," he admitted, grimacing. "I don't care," Kate said, beaming up at him. "I'm just happy." "Me too," Wyatt said, and kissed her right there in the middle of the dance floor in front of everyone. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Amarillo in a room that overlooked the main street. Kate had been nervous about this part, the physical intimacy that she'd never experienced before. But Wyatt was gentle and patient, and Kate discovered that being with someone you loved was entirely different from anything she'd imagined. Afterward, they laid together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked about their plans for the future. "I put the down payment on the land," Wyatt told her. 300 acres with a creek running through it. There's a small cabin already built. Nothing fancy, but it's sound. We can move in whenever you're ready." "I'm ready now," Kate said. "I've been ready since the moment you asked me to marry you." 2 weeks later, they loaded all their possessions into a wagon and made the half-day journey to what would be their home. The cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was well built and weather-tight. The land around it was beautiful rolling prairie with clusters of cottonwood trees along the creek. Kate stood in the doorway of their new home, looking out at the land, and she could already picture it. Horses grazing in this meadow. A garden behind the cabin. Maybe chickens scratching around the yard. Maybe even children someday, though. That thought still made her nervous. They threw themselves into the work of building their ranch. Wyatt had connections in the horse trade, and he used them to acquire several mares and a good stallion. He had an eye for quality that Kate quickly learned to trust. He could spot a good bloodline from 100 yards away, could gentle the wildest Mustang with patience and understanding instead of force. Kate continued to take tracking jobs, though she was more selective now. She wouldn't take anything that required her to be gone for more than a few days. She didn't want to be away from Wyatt and their growing ranch for too long, but her reputation remained strong, and people still sought her out when they needed something found. The money she earned from tracking, combined with what Wyatt made from selling horses, was enough to slowly expand their property and improve their home. They added a barn that first winter, working together to raise the walls and hammer in the roof. It was hard work, backbreaking at times, but there was something deeply satisfying about creating something with their own hands. In the evenings after the work was done, they would sit together on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over their land. Wyatt would play his harmonica, a skill Kate hadn't known he possessed until after they were married, and she would lean against him, feeling more content than she'd ever thought possible. 6 months into their marriage, they had their first real fight. Kate had taken a tracking job without telling Wyatt. 3 days hunting rustlers who'd been plaguing the local ranchers. Good money, and the ranch needed it. They were behind on some bills, and winter was coming, and Kate knew she could earn $60 if she brought the rustlers in. When she came back tired and dirty, but with the money in her pocket, Wyatt was furious. "You didn't even tell me you were leaving." His voice was louder than she'd ever heard it echoing in their small cabin. "I'm not a child who needs permission," Kate shot back, her own anger rising to match his. "I'm not your father trying to control you. I'm your partner. Partners communicate. You made a decision that affects both of us without including me. The ranch needs money. I earned us $60. You're welcome." Wyatt's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I don't care about the money. I care that you were gone for 3 days and I didn't know if you were alive or dead. I care that you made a decision about putting yourself in danger without even discussing it with me." Kate threw her saddlebags down. "I can take care of myself. I've been doing it my whole life." "I know you can," Wyatt's voice cracked. "But you're not alone anymore, Kate. You have a husband who loves you and who worries about you. And I can't just turn that off because you're too stubborn to admit that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to do everything alone anymore." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Kate stared at Wyatt, breathing hard, and saw the fear underneath his anger. The same fear she'd seen on the trail when they were hunting Cross and Claire. The fear of losing someone you loved. They didn't speak for 2 days. Kate slept in the loft and Wyatt took the main room. They moved around each other like strangers, careful and cold. But on the third day, Kate found Wyatt in the barn grooming Thunder with slow, methodical strokes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Wyatt's hand stilled on the brush. He didn't turn around. "What?" "I said I'm sorry. You're right. We're partners. I should have talked it to you first about taking the job." Wyatt set down the brush and turned to face her. His eyes were tired, and there were lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before. "I'm sorry, too. I know you're capable. I just couldn't stand the thought of something happening to you." "I know." Kate stepped closer. "Can you trust that I can take care of the self while still worrying because you love me?" "I can try." Wyatt pulled her into his arms. "Can you trust that I'll worry without trying to control you?" "I can try, my..." It wasn't a perfect resolution. They'd have other fights over the years, other moments of friction, as two independent people learned to build a life together. But it was a start, and that night they moved back to sleeping in the same bed, wrapped in each other's arms. A year into their marriage, Kate started feeling ill. At first, she thought it was just exhaustion. They'd been working hard expanding the ranch, and she'd taken a few difficult tracking jobs. But the exhaustion didn't go away. And then came the morning nausea, striking without warning, leaving her weak and shaking. She knew what it meant. Her monthly cycle had stopped. Her breasts were tender. The signs were all there, written in her body's language, as clearly as tracks in dust. She was pregnant. Kate sat by the creek for 3 hours after Mrs. O'Brien, the town midwife, confirmed it. Storm grazed nearby, unconcerned with her rider's crisis. The water moved over the rocks the same way it had for thousands of years, indifferent to human joy or fear. A baby, a child. Everything would change. She'd finally found balance. She could track part-time help with the ranch, be married without losing herself. And now this. What if she couldn't do it? What if motherhood swallowed her whole, turned her into someone unrecognizable? What if she failed at it? What if she resented the baby? Worse, what if she loved it so much she stopped being herself? Kate didn't tell Wyatt for a month. Every day, she meant to. Every evening when they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she opened her mouth to say the words. But fear closed her throat. She remembered her mother, or rather, she remembered the absence of her mother. The woman who died bringing a baby brother into the world, a brother who died too. Kate had been 5 years old, too young to understand death, only knowing that her mother was gone and never coming back. Her father had told her the story later. "Your mama was the strongest woman I ever knew, Katie, but sometimes strength isn't enough." 5-year-old Kate had understood one thing very clearly. Mothers die. Babies die. Love means loss. By the time Kate finally told Wyatt she was 3 months pregnant and starting to show, she couldn't hide it anymore. Couldn't keep this enormous secret locked inside her chest. They were in the cabin one evening, Wyatt reading through breeding records, and Kate supposedly mending a shirt, but really just staring at the fabric without seeing it. Outside, autumn was turning the cottonwoods gold. "I'm pregnant," Kate said abruptly, the words falling out without grace or preparation. Wyatt looked up from his papers. For a moment, he didn't seem to understand. Then comprehension dawned across his face like sunrise, and he was on his feet, crossing the room in 2 strides. He picked her up, spun her gently, his face transformed with joy. Kate, that's amazing. We're going to be parents. Then he saw her face, really saw it. The fear, the panic, the tears she was holding back through sheer force of will. He set her down carefully like she was made of glass. You're not happy. I'm terrified, Kate whispered. Wyatt led her to their bed, sat down beside her, took her hands in his. Talk to me. What are you afraid of? Everything came pouring out. Her mother's death, the baby brother who'd never drawn breath, the fear that motherhood would erase who she was, that she'd lose herself in caring for a child, the terror that she'd die like her mother had, leaving Wyatt alone, the worry that she'd be a terrible mother, that she didn't know how to do this, that she'd fail. Wyatt listened to it all without interrupting. When she finally ran out of words, when the tears were streaming down her face and her breath was coming in gasps, he pulled her close and held her. Kate, he said softly, listen to me. You're not going to lose yourself. You're going to expand. All your strength, all your independence, all your fire, it's still there. You'll still be the best tracker in Texas. The only difference is you'll also be a mother, and you'll be amazing at that too. What if I'm not? Her voice was small, childlike. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what partners do. He wiped her tears with gentle thumbs. You tracked down Emmett Cross. You made an impossible shot to save Claire. You survived losing your father and being betrayed by Marcus Webb and came out stronger. You can do this. I'm still scared. Good. Fear means you care, means you'll try your best. He kissed her forehead. And you're not alone, Kate. Whatever happens, we face it together. Kate leaned into him, letting herself be held, letting herself be vulnerable. It was still hard, this opening up, this trusting someone else with her fears. But Wyatt had never once let her down, never once made her feel weak for being afraid. Okay, she finally said. Okay, we're having a baby. We are, Wyatt said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. We're having a baby. The pregnancy was easier after that. Not easy, but easier. Wyatt fussed over her constantly, which drove Kate crazy, and also made her feel cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. He insisted on taking over the heavier ranch work. He brought her water when she couldn't sleep. He rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings and told her over and over how beautiful she looked, even when she felt like a beached whale. Kate continued taking tracking jobs through her 6th month, though she stuck to easier cases. Nothing that required extended travel or rough terrain. The ranchers and lawmen who hired her were surprisingly understanding. Most of them had wives or daughters, and they knew what pregnancy entailed. Claire visited often, bringing supplies and advice and friendship. She was planning her wedding to Robert full of excitement about flowers and dresses and all the things Kate had never cared much about. But listening to Claire talk about her love for Robert, seeing how happy she was, Kate was genuinely glad for her friend. You're glowing, Claire said one afternoon as they sat together shelling peas on Kate's porch. Wyatt says the same thing. I think you're both delusional. But Kate was smiling. He fusses over you like a mother hen, doesn't he? Last week he suggested I stay in bed all day. I told him if he wanted dinner, I needed to be able to get up and cook it. Claire laughed. My father was the same way when my mother was carrying me. He apparently drove her to distraction with his hovering. She finally threatened to brain him with a frying pan if he didn't give her some space. As winter settled in, Kate grew larger and more uncomfortable. She could no longer ride easily, which frustrated her to no end. But Wyatt was there with endless patience and support. He never complained when she woke him in the middle of the night because she couldn't sleep. He never made her feel like a burden, even though she knew she was slowing down, unable to help with the ranch work the way she used to. The baby came on a cold February morning, announcing its arrival with pains that woke Kate just after midnight. The contractions started gentle, almost tentative, then built in intensity, until Kate was gripping the bed frame and breathing through waves of pain that took her breath away. Wyatt rode immediately to fetch Mrs. O'Brien from town, pushing thunder hard through the winter darkness. By the time they got back, Kate was in the full throes of labor, her nightgown soaked with sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead. First babies usually take their time, Mrs. O'Brien said calmly, examining Kate with practiced efficiency. But this little one seems to be in a hurry. She was right. After only 6 hours of labor, which Mrs. O'Brien assured them was remarkably fast, for a first baby, Kate gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a strong set of lungs in his father's dark hair. Wyatt cried when Mrs. O'Brien placed the baby in his arms. Tears ran unashamedly down his face as he looked at his son, this tiny, perfect creature that he and Kate had created together. He's perfect, Wyatt said, his voice choked with emotion. Kate, he's absolutely perfect. Kate, exhausted but exhilarated, reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. His fingers wrapped around hers instinctively, and she felt something in her chest explode. Not the fear she'd been carrying for months, not the worry about losing herself. This was love, bigger and fiercer than anything she'd ever felt. A love that didn't diminish her, but expanded her, made her more than she'd been before. What should we name him? Kate asked. They'd discussed names for months without settling on anything definite. But looking at their son, Wyatt said, "What about Benjamin? It means son of my right hand. Seems fitting for a boy born into a family that makes its own rules." "Benjamin Dalton," Kate said, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Benjamin. Welcome to the world." The baby opened his eyes, looking unfocused and confused, and then yawned hugely. Wyatt laughed through his tears. "Already bored with us." Mrs. O'Brien stayed for a few days to help Kate recover and make sure the baby was nursing properly. Wyatt barely left their side, bringing Kate food and water, changing Benjamin's diapers, walking the floor with him when he fussed. He was a natural father, patient and gentle and utterly devoted. Kate watched him with their son and fell even more deeply in love with her husband. Seeing the tenderness with which he held this tiny, helpless creature, the care he showed, the love that radiated from every touch and word, it made her heart swell with feelings too big for language. This was what she'd been afraid of for so many years. This vulnerability, this opening of her heart to another person, and now to this tiny new person who depended on them completely. But she'd been wrong to be afraid. This wasn't weakness. This was strength of a different kind. The strength to love without reservation. The strength to trust in tomorrow. The strength to believe that something this precious was worth the risk. Benjamin was an easy baby, sleeping for decent stretches at night and rarely fussing unless he was hungry or wet. As he grew, his personality emerged. He was curious and alert, always watching everything around him with wide, serious eyes. He loved being outside, settling immediately whenever they took him out onto the porch or into the yard. "He's going to be like his mother," Wyatt said one spring day when Benjamin was about 4 months old. The baby was propped against Wyatt's chest, staring intently at a pair of foals playing in the meadow. "Always wanting to know what's happening, always paying attention to everything. As long as he gets your way with horses and your kind heart," Kate said, watching her husband hold their son with such gentle confidence. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm with Benjamin as part of it. Kate began taking tracking jobs again when he was about 6 months old, though only very short ones, and only when Wyatt was home to watch the baby. She found that her skills had not diminished at all. If anything, motherhood had sharpened her instincts, made her even more aware of subtle changes in her environment. Benjamin was a year old when Kate realized something that made her laugh out loud. She'd spent her whole life afraid that love would make her smaller, weaker, less herself. But the opposite had happened. Loving Wyatt, being loved by him, having Benjamin, all of it had made her larger, more capable, more confident, more complete. She was still Catherine Brennan, the best tracker in Texas. But now she was also Kate Dalton, wife and mother and partner, in building something that would last beyond her lifetime. And far from being a burden or a limitation, these roles felt like the most natural thing in the world. That evening, as they sat on their porch, watching Benjamin toddle around the yard, chasing a patient old barn cat, Wyatt said, "We've done all right for ourselves, haven't we?" Kate looked at her husband, at their son, at the land they'd built together. "Better than I ever dreamed when you rode into Amarillo looking for help that day." "You knew what you wanted," Wyatt said. "You said you needed me and asked me to name what I wanted. Turns out what I wanted was exactly this." Kate leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "You are son, this life we've built together." Wyatt pulled her close and kissed her softly. Best decision I ever made was to trust the sheriff when he said you were the best. He was right, Kate said, grinning, but not in the way either of us expected. The stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Benjamin had caught the cat and was now petting it with the over-enthusiastic gentleness of a toddler. The barn cat endured with patient resignation. Kate Brennan Dalton sat on the porch of the home she'd built with the man she loved, watching their son explore his world, and felt a peace she'd never known was possible. The future stretched ahead of them, unknown and full of possibility. But whatever came, they would face it together. Partners in all things. The years passed like water flowing over stones, each one leaving its mark, shaping the landscape of their lives in ways both subtle and profound. When Benjamin was 3, Kate gave birth to a daughter. Rose arrived on a warm May morning, smaller than her brother had been, with blonde hair that caught the sunlight like spun gold and blue eyes that matched Kate's exactly. She was a quiet baby, watchful and solemn, studying the world with an intensity that made Wyatt laugh. "She's judging us," he said, holding his newborn daughter with the same gentle competence he'd shown with Benjamin. "She's assessing," Kate corrected, smiling despite her exhaustion. "My daughter through and through." Rose's first word was not mama or papa, but horse. She said it clearly one morning when she was 10 months old, pointing at Thunder grazing in the pasture. Wyatt's chest puffed with pride, so visible that Kate had to hide her smile. 2 years later, Samuel was born. If Rose had been quiet and contemplative, Sam was her opposite in every way. He announced his arrival with a scream that seemed to shake the rafters of their cabin, and he didn't stop for months. He cried when he was hungry. He cried when he was tired. He cried when he was perfectly content, as if the sheer energy inside his small body needed release. Kate walked the floor with him for endless nights, exhausted beyond measure, while Wyatt took over the daytime ranch work. Benjamin, now 5 years old, looked at his baby brother with the weary resignation of someone who understood that life had just become significantly more complicated. "When can we send him back?" Ben asked one particularly trying evening when Sam had been crying for 3 hours straight. Kate, her hair disheveled and her eyes bloodshot, laughed despite her exhaustion. "When he learns to sleep through the night, so never." But when Sam finally learned to walk at 10 months faster than either of his siblings, he toddled straight to Benjamin and wrapped his chubby arms around his big brother's legs in an embrace of pure love. Ben sighed, looked down at the baby who was grinning up at him with obvious adoration, and said, "Okay, he can stay." The ranch grew along with their family. Wyatt's reputation as a horse breeder spread across 3 territories. Men came from as far as New Mexico and Arkansas to buy his horses, willing to pay premium prices for animals that combined beauty with intelligence and a gentle temperament that made them ideal for everything from ranch work to family riding. Kate's tracking work became the stuff of legend. She was featured in a newspaper article that called her the finest tracker in Texas, possibly in the entire Southwest. The article mentioned her impossible shot that had saved Claire Sterling's life, though it got some of the details wrong, making the distance 70 yards instead of 30, and adding dramatic elements that hadn't existed. Kate found the exaggeration amusing, but also useful. Her reputation meant she could be even more selective about which jobs she accepted. They built a bigger house when Rose was 2 and Sam was a newborn. Nothing fancy, but solid and spacious, with 4 bedrooms and a real kitchen that made Kate feel like a wealthy woman. They hired a ranch hand named Tom Cooper, a quiet man in his 40s who was good with horses and asked no questions about having a woman for a boss's partner. By the time Benjamin was 10, the Dalton Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the region. They had 800 acres now purchased bit by bit as they saved money. The creek still ran clear and cold through their property, and the cottonwood trees Kate had first seen as saplings were now tall enough to provide real shade. It was in the shade of those cottonwoods that Kate taught Benjamin the finer points of tracking. He was a natural with an eye for detail that reminded Kate painfully of her father. At 10 years old, Ben could identify animal tracks with accuracy, could tell how long ago something had passed through based on the condition of disturbed earth, could read the story written in broken branches and displaced stones. "Why do we track Mama?" Ben asked one afternoon as they followed coyote prints along the creek bank. Kate thought about the question, about all the reasons her father had taught her this skill. "Because the land speaks, Ben. Most people don't listen. They walk through the world blind to all the stories being told around them. We're different. We pay attention. We see what others miss. They followed the coyote trail for 2 miles. Ben lost it 3 times, and each time Kate helped him find it again, showing him what to look for, teaching him the patience required to be truly good at this. I'm not as good as you, Ben said, frustration evident in his young voice. Kate knelt beside him, meeting his eyes. Not yet, but you will be. Your grandfather taught me everything he knew. I'm teaching you. Someday you'll be better than both of us, and someday you'll teach your children. Ben looked up at her with those serious eyes that seemed too old for a 10-year-old. What if I don't want to track? What if I want to do something else? The question caught Kate off guard. She'd assumed, without really thinking about it, that Ben would follow in her footsteps the way she'd followed in her father's. But looking at her son's earnest face, she remembered what her father had told her once. You get to choose who you are, Katie girl. Nobody else gets to make that choice for you. Then you do something else, Kate said firmly. I'm teaching you this because it's important to me, because it's part of our family's story. But you get to decide who you are, Ben. You get to choose your own path. Do you understand? Did Grandpa tell you that? Kate smiled, feeling her father's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. Yes, and now I'm telling you. Ben nodded slowly, then returned his attention to the tracks. They found where the coyote had to drink from the creek, and Ben correctly identified the paw prints of her 3 pups. Kate felt a surge of pride watching her son work, even as she made peace with the possibility that he might not want this life she'd built for herself. The attack came on a Tuesday. Kate was in the yard with Rose, who at 7 years old was already showing a remarkable aptitude with horses. They were working with one of the younger mares, teaching Rose how to read the animal's body language, when Kate's instincts suddenly screamed a warning. A rider appeared on the horizon. There was something wrong about his posture, something that set every nerve in Kate's body on edge. She'd learned long ago to trust these instincts. They'd kept her alive through situations that should have killed her. Rose, go inside, now. Find your father and stay with him. Rose looked at her mother's face, saw something there that made her move without argument. She ran for the house, her blonde braids flying behind her. The rider came closer. Kate's hand moved to the rifle she kept nearby, always, even after 10 years of relative peace. As the man's features became clear, recognition hit her like a fist to the gut. Jake Mullins, Emmett Cross's right-hand man, the one who'd ridden away that morning 10 years ago, leaving his boss to die. He'd aged badly. His face was harder, meaner, marked by violence and years of hard living. But his eyes were what made Kate's blood run cold. They burned with a hatred that had clearly festered for a decade. Catherine Brennan Dalton, Jake said, his voice rough as gravel. He dismounted slowly, deliberately. Heard you had kids now. Nice family. Be a shame if something happened to them. Kate's hand tightened on her rifle, but it was still in its scabbard on Storm's saddle 10 feet away. She was armed only with the knife in her boot. What do you want, Jake? Revenge. He said it simply, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You killed Emmett Cross. He was like a brother to me. Now I'm going to take something from you. Payment for what you took from me. Kate calculated her options. Jake was 20 yards away. Her rifle was behind her. Wyatt was in the barn with the children, hopefully keeping them safe. Tom Cooper was out checking the north fence line, too far away to help. Cross got what he deserved, Kate said, keeping her voice calm and level. He kidnapped 2 people. He was using you, Jake. You were expendable to him, just muscle to do his dirty work. Shut up. Jake's hand moved toward his gun. You don't know nothing about him, about what we went through together. I know he was going to get you killed eventually. I know Tom Reeves was smart enough to run for Mexico and probably lived a long, happy life because of it. I know you spent 10 years eating yourself alive with hatred instead of building something worth having. Jake's face twisted with rage. His hand closed around his gun, beginning to draw. Kate tensed, preparing to dive for her rifle, knowing she probably wouldn't make it in time. Then a shot cracked across the yard. Jake screamed, his gun flying from his hand, blood spraying from his shattered fingers. He stumbled backward, clutching his hand, his face a mask of shock and pain. Kate spun. Benjamin stood 30 yards away at the corner of the house, Kate's rifle steady in his hands. His face was pale, his eyes wide, but his hands were rock solid. 10 years old, and he'd just made a shot that most grown men couldn't make under pressure. Nobody threatens my mama, Ben said, his voice shaking, but determined. Wyatt came running from the barn, his own rifle drawn, Rose and Sam behind him. Tom Cooper appeared from the other direction, riding hard. Within minutes, they had Jake Mullins tied up and bleeding. His attempted revenge ended before it could truly begin. They hauled him to Amarillo that afternoon. The sheriff threw him in jail on charges of attempted murder, along with outstanding warrants from Mexico that had accumulated over the decade he'd spent hiding there. Jake would spend the rest of his life behind bars, and Kate found she felt nothing but relief. That night, after the children were in bed, Kate held Benjamin while he shook with the aftermath of what he'd done. He'd been brave in the moment, but now the reality was hitting him. He was just a boy who'd been forced to violence to protect his mother. "I was so scared, Mama," Ben whispered against her shoulder. "What if I'd missed? What if I'd hit you instead? But you didn't." Kate stroked his hair, fighting back her own tears. "You made an impossible shot because you're my son. You're brave and skilled and everything I could hope for." Ben pulled back, looking at her with those serious eyes. "Mama, I don't want to be a tracker." Kate felt her heart skip, but she kept her expression neutral. "All right, what do you want to be?" "I want to study rocks." The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them back for a long time. "Geology. I like how rocks tell stories like tracks do, but older. Millions of years old. There's a university in Austin that teaches it. I want to go there. I want to learn about how the earth was made." Kate felt a pang of loss. Her legacy wouldn't continue through Ben the way her father's had continued through her. But then she remembered her own words to him. "You get to decide who you are. Nobody else gets to make that choice for you." "Then you'll study geology," Kate said firmly, "and you'll be brilliant at it. Your grandfather would be proud. I'm proud." Ben hugged her fiercely. "Thank you, Mama." "Just promise me one thing," Kate said. "Promise me you'll remember what I taught you. Not because you have to use it, but because it's part of who you are, part of our family story." "I promise." The drought started in the 15th year of their marriage. It began gradually, almost imperceptibly. A dry spring, a hot summer, then another dry fall, then a winter with almost no snow. By the second year, the creek that had always run clear and strong was reduced to a muddy trickle. The grass withered and died. The horses grew thin despite the grain they bought at prices that made Kate's stomach turn. By the third year, they were in real trouble. Buyers had disappeared. Nobody wanted to buy horses when they couldn't feed the ones they already had. The savings Kate and Wyatt had accumulated over 15 years of hard work dwindled away, spent on grain and hay that cost 3 times what it should. They had a $2,000 banknote coming due in 3 months and no way to pay it. Kate watched her husband age 10 years in what felt like weeks. Wyatt stopped eating properly. He couldn't sleep, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of potential failure crushing him. The ranch was his dream made real, and it was slipping through his fingers like water through a sieve. "We're going to lose everything," he said one night, his voice hollow. Kate held him, feeling the tension in his body, the fear that radiated from him like heat from a fire. "We'll figure it out. We always do." How? It was a genuine question. He didn't know, and neither did she. The telegram arrived 3 days later. Kate read it once, twice, 3 times. A tracking job in New Mexico territory. Blackjack Kerrigan wanted for murder, assault, rape. He'd killed 2 trackers already who'd tried to bring him in. The reward was $1,200 dead or alive. Additional $300 if the hostage he'd taken was rescued alive. $1,500 total. Almost enough to save the ranch. The catch was simple. Kerrigan was smart, vicious, and had no compunction about killing anyone who got in his way. The job would take a minimum of 3 weeks in dangerous territory, and there was a very real chance Kate wouldn't come back. She stared at the telegram for a long time, thinking about Benjamin, who was about to leave for university, about Rose, who was 12 and just starting to really understand horse breeding, about Samuel, who was 10 and worshipped his father, about Wyatt, who loved her so much that the thought of losing her was eating him alive. And she thought about the ranch, about everything they'd built together, about the future she wanted for her children. That evening after dinner, Kate made her decision. "I'm taking the job." Wyatt looked up from the account books he'd been staring at without really seeing. "What job?" "New Mexico, the Kerrigan tracking. $1,200 plus a bonus if I bring back his hostage. It could save the ranch." No. The word was flat absolute. Kate felt her spine stiffen. We need the money, Wyatt. This could save everything we've built. I don't care. You're not going. You don't get to forbid me. Kate's voice rose despite her attempt to stay calm. I'm not a child. I'm a grown woman who can make her own decisions. Wyatt slammed the account book shut. You're a mother. Rosa is 12. Sam is 10. Ben is leaving for university next month. What happens to them if you don't come back? What happens to them if we lose the ranch? Kate shot back. If they grow up knowing I could have saved our home but was too scared to try, if they have to watch their father break under the weight of failure. This isn't about being scared. Wyatt was on his feet now, his voice louder than she'd heard it in years. This is about being smart. Kerrigan has killed 2 trackers already, professional trackers with years of experience. What makes you think you're different? Because I am the best. Why? Kate stood to face him, her own anger rising to match his. You know that everyone knows that I can do things other trackers can't. And those other trackers are dead, Kate, dead. What good is being the best if you're lying in a grave in New Mexico? The words hung between them like a physical barrier. Kate could see the fear underneath Wyatt's anger, raw and terrible. He was terrified of losing her. But she was terrified, too terrified of losing everything they'd built, terrified of being helpless while their dreams died. I would rather lose this ranch than lose you, Wyatt said, his voice dropping to something quieter but no less intense. We can rebuild land, buildings, horses. We can start over somewhere else. We can't rebuild you. Don't ask me to risk that. Kate wanted to give in. Part of her wanted to fold to let Wyatt protect her, to stay safe at home while their ranch died around them. But she couldn't. She'd spent her whole life being strong, being capable, being the person who solved problems instead of hiding from them. I have to do this, she said quietly. You might be willing to lose the ranch, but I'm not. This is our children's legacy, Wyatt. This is everything we've worked for. I won't let it die without a fight. They argued for hours. Rose and Samuel hid in their room, unused to hearing their parents fight like this. Benjamin, nearly grown now, sat on the porch and stared at the stars, understanding more than his younger siblings about the impossible choice their mother was facing. Finally exhausted and hoarse, they went to bed. Wyatt turned his back to her, and Kate lay staring at the ceiling, knowing what she had to do. She waited until just before dawn. Wyatt's breathing had finally evened out into sleep, though she knew it was restless, troubled. She dressed quietly, packed her gear, with hands that had done this 1,000 times before. She wrote a note and left it on the kitchen table where he'd find it. I'm sorry I have to do this. Trust me. I love you. Forever yours, Kate. She saddled Storm in the pre-dawn darkness, moving as quietly as possible. As she rode away from the ranch, away from her sleeping family, she felt something tear inside her chest. But she kept riding, toward New Mexico, toward danger, toward the money that might save everything they'd built. Behind her in the house, Wyatt woke an hour later. He found the note, read it once. Then he put his fist through the kitchen wall, his roar of anguish and rage waking the children. Kate had been gone for 3 days when she admitted to herself that this might have been a mistake. New Mexico territory was different from Texas. Harder, more desolate. The Badlands stretched endlessly, a maze of canyons and mesas where a man could hide forever if he knew what he was doing. And Blackjack Kerrigan definitely knew what he was doing. She'd found his trail easily enough. He wasn't trying to hide, which told her something important. He was confident, overconfident maybe. He'd killed 2 trackers, and he didn't think a third would be any different. He didn't know he was dealing with Kate Brennan. The tracking was difficult, but not impossible. Kerrigan was moving fast, but not carefully. He left signs that Kate could read even in this unfamiliar terrain. A disturbed cactus here, a boot print in sandy soil there, the remains of campfires that told her she was gaining on him. But she was alone, completely alone in a way she hadn't been since before she met Wyatt. And the loneliness was worse than the danger. Every night as she made camp, she thought about her family, about Wyatt's face when he found her note, about whether he'd ever forgive her, about whether she'd made the worst mistake of her life. On the 20th day, she found Kerrigan's camp. He had a hostage, just like the telegram had said. A young Mexican woman, maybe 17 years old, tied to a Joshua tree, with rough rope that had rubbed her wrists raw. Her face was bruised, her dress torn, and the look in her eyes said she'd been through hell. Kerrigan himself was exactly what Kate had expected. Tall, heavily muscled, with the kind of casual cruelty that came from years of taking what he wanted without consequences. He was cleaning his rifle when Kate found them, confident enough in his isolation that he hadn't bothered posting a watch. Kate had a choice to make: a difficult shot with a hostage at risk, or wait for a better opportunity that might not come. She thought about Claire Sterling, about that impossible shot 10 years ago that had defined her reputation. She thought about her father's words: "The land speaks, darling, you just have to listen." And she thought about Wyatt, about going home to him, about making this right. The shot was 90 yards, longer than the one that killed Cross. Wind gusting unpredictably. Kerrigan using the girl as a shield, his gun pressed to her head. Kate's margin of error was maybe an inch, maybe less. She took the shot. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The sound echoed across the Badlands like thunder. And Blackjack Kerrigan fell a perfect hole through his left eye, dead before he hit the ground. The Mexican girl screamed, but she was unharmed. Kate had made another impossible shot. Another legend to add to the stories people told about the tracker from Texas who never missed. But this time Kate didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired. Tired and scared and desperate to go home. She brought Kerrigan's body back to the nearest town, collected the $1,200 reward plus the $300 bonus for saving the hostage. $1,500 total. Enough to save the ranch with money left over. But she'd been shot. A grazing wound across her ribs, where one of Kerrigan's men she'd killed him too had gotten lucky. The doctor in town had bandaged it, told her she was fortunate, told her to rest for a week before riding. Kate gave herself 2 days. Then she headed home. She rode up to the ranch at dusk 3 weeks after she'd left. Wyatt was sitting on the porch, his head in his hands, looking like he'd aged 20 years. When he heard the hoofbeats, he looked up. Their eyes met across the distance. Kate saw relief flood his face, followed immediately by anger. He walked toward her slowly, deliberately, and she could see the war of emotions playing across his features. He saw the bandage on her ribs. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." His voice was tight, controlled. "You almost died." Kate dismounted carefully, her ribs protesting the movement. "But I didn't. I came back. And I saved our ranch." Wyatt's control broke. "I don't care about the ranch, Kate. I care about you. Do you understand that this place is just wood and dirt and grass? You're everything. You're my whole world, and you could have died in some godforsaken desert in New Mexico, and I would have gotten a telegram instead of my wife." His voice cracked on the last word, and Kate saw tears in his eyes. In 15 years of marriage, she'd seen him cry exactly 3 times. When Benjamin was born, when Rose was born, when Samuel was born. Never from fear or pain or anger. Until now. "I'm sorry." Kate's own tears finally came hot and fast. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was being brave. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I was just being stubborn and scared." "Scared of what?" Wyatt demanded. "What could you possibly be scared of?" "Of losing everything we built. Of not being strong enough. Of failing you." The words poured out. "Of being weak. Of admitting that maybe I can't do everything alone anymore." Wyatt pulled her into his arms, carefully avoiding her injured ribs. "You could never fail me, Kate. But you can hurt me, and you did. Don't ever do that again. Promise me. Whatever we face it together. Partners, remember." "I promise." Kate buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar smell of him. Horse and leather and home. "I promise, from now on we decide together. No more running off to save the day alone." "Partners," Wyatt repeated, holding her like he'd never let go. "Partners." Kate agreed. They saved the ranch with the money from Kerrigan. The drought broke the following spring, and life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as life could be in the Dalton household. Benjamin left for university that fall, headed to Austin to study geology like he'd dreamed. Kate helped him pack, fighting back tears as she folded his clothes and tried not to think about how empty the house would feel without him. "I'll come back for holidays," Ben promised, "and summers if you want help with the ranch." "We'll always want you here," Kate said, "but you go learn about your rocks. Make us proud." "I learned it from the best tracker in Texas," Ben said, hugging her. even if I'm tracking stones instead of animals. Rose, at 15, announced she wanted to marry Thomas Bennett, a neighboring rancher's son. He was 17, hardworking and honest, and he looked at Rose like she hung the moon. More importantly, Rose looked at him the same way. "She's too young," Wyatt said when they were alone. "She's the same age I was when I met Marcus Webb," Kate pointed out. "The difference is, Thomas Bennett is nothing like Marcus. That boy will support her dreams, not try to change her." Rose and Thomas married the following spring. They wanted to breed horses combining the best of the Dalton stock with the Bennett family's bloodlines. Rose had her father's eye for quality and her mother's fierce determination. Kate had no doubt she'd be successful. Samuel, meanwhile, was a natural cowboy. At 15, he could rope and ride better than most men twice his age. He had no interest in university or geology or anything beyond the ranch. He was exactly where he wanted to be, and everyone knew he'd inherit the Dalton Ranch someday. "I'm never leaving," Sam told Kate one afternoon as they worked together mending fence. "This land is in my blood." "Like tracking is in mine," Kate said, understanding completely. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing of their family. Rose had children, 2 daughters, who showed the same aptitude with horses that their mother had. Samuel married a girl from town, Alice Cooper, sweet and strong and perfectly suited to ranch life. They had twin boys who were absolute terrors and absolute joys in equal measure. Benjamin became a professor at the University of Texas, teaching geology and publishing papers about rock formations that Kate didn't fully understand but was fiercely proud of anyway. He married a fellow professor, a woman named Clara, who loved his intensity and his passion for ancient stones. And through it all, Kate and Wyatt grew older together. Gray touched Wyatt's hair, first then Kate's. Lines appeared around their eyes, marks of years spent squinting into the Texas sun. Their hands grew rougher, more weathered, marked by decades of hard work. But they were happy, deeply, profoundly happy, in a way that Kate had never imagined possible when she was a lonely 22-year-old who thought love was something that made you weak. Their 30th anniversary arrived with the turning of autumn leaves. They decided to renew their vows at the ranch, surrounded by everyone they loved. All 3 of their children came home bringing spouses and grandchildren. Claire Sterling Morgan was there now, widowed Robert having died 5 years earlier, but still one of Kate's dearest friends. Edward Sterling, now in his 80s, attended with the help of a cane in his grandson's arm. They stood under the cottonwood trees by the creek, the same trees that had been saplings when they'd first bought this land. Wyatt took Kate's hands, and she was struck by how familiar they felt. 30 years of holding these hands, and they still made her feel safe. "I, Wyatt, take you, Kate, to be my wife, my partner, my best friend," Wyatt said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "30 years ago, I promised to love you, honor you, support you. I've kept that promise. Today, I renew it. For however many years we have left, you're my home." Kate's voice was equally steady. "I, Kate, take you, Wyatt, to be my husband, my partner, my everything. You saw me when I was hiding. You loved me when I was afraid. You've been my strength when I was weak and my anchor when I was lost. I renew my promise to love you, challenge you, walk beside you, always." When they kissed, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, there wasn't a dry eye watching. The celebration afterward was loud and joyful, with music and dancing and more food than any group could possibly eat. But as the sun began to set, Kate and Wyatt slipped away to the creek, needing a moment alone together. They sat on the bank where the cottonwoods cast long shadows across the water. The creek still ran clear and strong, recovered from the drought, years eternal in its flowing. "This is where I want to be buried someday," Kate said, not morbidly but matter-of-factly. "Right here where I can hear the water and feel the wind." Wyatt took her hand, their fingers interlocking automatically after 30 years of practice. "Me too," together like everything else. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the water and the wind and the distant sounds of their families celebrating. 52 years old and 56 years old, and Kate couldn't imagine a better way to spend forever than right here, right now, with this man beside her. Kate was 70 years old when the telegram arrived. She'd slowed down over the years, her knees complaining, when she knelt to examine tracks, her eyes requiring glasses for close work. But her mind was as sharp as ever, and her instincts hadn't dulled with age. When the sheriff asked for her help with a missing 6-year-old girl who'd wandered away from a wagon train, Kate didn't hesitate. Wyatt, now 74, looked at her with concern. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Kate." "I know," she said, checking her rifle with hands that had held this weapon for more than 60 years. "But that little girl is scared and alone. If I can find her, I will." The tracking took 4 hours. Her knees ached, her back protested, but her skills remained perfect, honed by a lifetime of practice. She found the child hiding under a rocky overhang, cold and terrified, but unharmed, calling for her mother. "It's okay, sweetheart," Kate said gently, wrapping the girl in her coat. "I'm taking you home." The parents wept with gratitude when Kate returned their daughter. Word spread quickly. Even at 70, Catherine Brennan Dalton could find what others couldn't. The legend lived on. When Kate got home, Wyatt was waiting on the porch. "Can't resist showing off, can you?" Kate grinned, feeling decades younger than her years. "Not showing off if you're actually that good." But they both knew. That was her last job. Time to rest. Time to enjoy the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who came to visit. Time to pass on her knowledge to anyone who wanted to learn. Time to simply be. 4 years later, on a quiet spring morning, Wyatt died. He went peacefully in his sleep the way everyone hopes to go. Kate woke to find him beside her, his face serene, his hand still holding hers. No pain, no suffering, just gone, slipped away like water through fingers. She didn't cry at first. She simply sat with him for a long time, memorizing his face one last time, remembering everything. 52 years of marriage, 52 years of partnership and love, and building something that would outlast them both. The funeral was held at the ranch. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren gathered. The church in town couldn't hold everyone who came to pay their respects to Wyatt Dalton, so they held the service outside under the Texas sky he'd loved. Kate spoke, her voice clear and strong, despite her grief. "Wyatt Dalton was the bravest man I ever knew. Not because he could ride or shoot or fight, though he could do all those things. He was brave because he wasn't afraid to ask for help when he needed it. He was brave because he wasn't afraid to love completely and openly. He was brave because he saw a woman who didn't fit the usual mold, and instead of trying to change her, he celebrated who she was." She paused, looking at the faces of her family, seeing Wyatt in their features, in their expressions, in the way they held themselves. "He gave me the greatest gift anyone can give. He gave me the freedom to be myself while still being loved. I'll miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I'll never regret a single moment we had together. We built something that will last long after we're both gone, and that's the truest kind of immortality." They buried Wyatt under the cottonwood trees by the creek, exactly where he'd wanted to be. The gravestone was simple: Wyatt Dalton, beloved husband, father, grandfather. He saw the best in everyone. Kate lived for 3 more years after Wyatt died. She remained on the ranch, cared for by her children, but still fiercely independent. Every day, without fail, she walked down to the creek and sat by Wyatt's grave, talking to him as if he could hear. "The children are doing well," she'd say, her voice carrying across the water. "Benjamin's a full professor now, published another book. Rose's horses won 3 championships this year. Samuel expanded the ranch, bought the old Henderson property. 200 more acres. You'd be so proud of them. I'm proud of them." Maybe he hurt her, maybe he didn't. But talking to him made the loneliness bearable, made her feel connected still to the man who'd been her partner in all things. On a warm spring morning, many years after Wyatt's passing, Kate woke feeling different, lighter somehow, as if gravity had loosened its hold on her bones. She was 77 years old, and she'd lived a good life, a full life, a life without regrets. She walked down to the creek one last time. The wildflowers were blooming: prairie clover and bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, painting the meadow in brilliant colors. Like the flowers Wyatt used to bring her back when they were young and just beginning their story. She sat under the cottonwoods, closed her eyes, and thought of him. Thought of that first moment when he'd ridden up, desperate and afraid. Thought of the campfire where they'd first really talked. Thought of the impossible shot and the proposal and the wedding and the children and the years and years of building something beautiful together. When her grandchildren found her an hour later, she was gone. A peaceful smile on her face, her hand resting on the earth, as if reaching for someone just out of sight. They buried Catherine Brennan Dalton beside her husband under the cottonwoods she'd loved. The gravestone read simply, Catherine and Wyatt Dalton, together in all things. The ranch remained in the Dalton family for 4 generations. Samuel's great-great-grandchildren still raised horses there, maintaining the bloodlines and the reputation that Wyatt had built. The land prospered carefully, tended a living testament to 2 people who'd built something meant to last. Benjamin's geology textbooks were used in universities across America for 50 years. His theories about rock formation influenced an entire generation of scientists. His children became teachers and researchers, spreading knowledge the way their grandmother had spread the art of tracking. Rose's horse bloodline became legendary. Champions for half a century known for their intelligence and gentle temperament and the same quality that Wyatt had prized. Her descendants continued the work each generation, adding to the legacy. But more than accomplishments, more than land or horses or academic achievements, Kate and Wyatt left something more valuable. They left values, hard work, independence tempered with partnership, respect for others' choices, the courage to be yourself, the bravery to love completely. In Amarillo and the surrounding territories, people still told stories about Catherine Brennan, the legendary tracker who could follow any animal through any terrain, about Wyatt Dalton, the cowboy who'd been smart enough to say, I need you, name what you want, and brave enough to fall in love with the answer. Young women heard about Kate and realized they didn't have to choose between strength and love. They could be capable and independent and still find someone who celebrated those qualities instead of fearing them. Young men heard about Wyatt and learned that true strength included vulnerability and respect. That loving someone didn't mean controlling them, but supporting them in becoming their fullest self. The stories became folklore passed down through generations. Embellished, certainly. The shot that saved Claire grew to impossible distances. The tracking feats became more dramatic, but the core truth remained. 2 people had found each other against all odds. They had built a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love. They'd created a legacy that went beyond wealth or fame, something that touched hearts and changed lives. On quiet evenings when the wind blows across the Texas prairie and the sun sets in brilliant colors over the land, if you listen carefully, you might hear something. The soft murmur of 2 voices talking and laughing together. A harmonica playing an old familiar tune. The sound of horses grazing peacefully in tall grass. Wyatt and Kate together still, watching over the land they loved and the family they created. Their story never really ending, just transforming into something eternal. A legacy of love that would last forever. The ranch house still stands proud on that land, expanded and modernized, but maintaining its original character. The creek still runs clear and cold. The cottonwood trees tower over everything ancient and strong, marking the place where 2 lives are buried together. And sometimes when great-great-grandchildren play in the meadow running and laughing and full of life, they stop and look toward those trees. They feel something, though they can't quite name it. A presence, a warmth. The enduring power of 2 people who'd found each other and built something that would last forever. That was the true story of Catherine Brennan and Wyatt Dalton. Not just a story of tracking and rescue, though it began with that. Not just a story of falling in love, though that was central to everything. It was a story about 2 people who had the courage to be themselves, who found in each other the perfect partner, and who proved that true love doesn't limit or diminish, but instead expands and enriches everything it touches. It was a story of the Wild West, of a time when life was hard and survival uncertain, but when the rewards for courage and determination were measured not in gold, but in family, in community, in lives well lived. And it was a story that would continue to be told, and as long as there were people who believed in love, who believed in partnership, who believed that sometimes the best thing you can do is ask for help and be brave enough to accept it when it comes in an unexpected form. Wyatt had needed a tracker and found so much more. Kate had thought she wanted to be alone and discovered that the right person didn't take away her independence but gave her someone to share it with. Their story was complete. Their lives were lived fully and without regret. And the love they'd shared continued to ripple outward through generations, touching lives they would never meet, inspiring hearts they would never know. That was their true legacy, more valuable than land or horses or gold. They had loved completely, lived authentically, and left the world better than they found it. And in the end, what more could anyone ask?